Dark and Light has been on the MMOHuts radar for some time now. The game even held a top position on our most anticipated games of 2017 list. Now that the game is in closed beta, does it live up to the hype? I'm Colton for MMOHuts.com, and this is our first look at Dark and Light. I want to start this review by saying that yes, I do know that Dark and Light is a buy-to-play game. We've received tons of requests to cover the game though, so we're honoring these requests because we care about you, our viewers. We want to give you the coverage you want to see. Dark and Light underwent many changes during its 12-year development cycle. In fact, here's a clip from the 2005 E3 trailer where developers were boasting that Dark and Light was the largest MMORPG you've ever seen.
A satyr. The creature rushed down to do battle. Our protagonist quickly dismounted and raised his shield. The enthusiastic Dodo rushed towards the satyr, probably expecting a handful of oats, but it got the angry creature's deadly hoof instead.
This was the 2006 version of the game by NPCube. That version of the game released in an unfinished and underdeveloped state. The game was crawling with bugs and awful design choices. The original vision of the developers was grand, especially for the time, but what we received fell far shorter of that vision. But Colton, I hear you frantically typing into the comments. That was the 2006 game. What does that have to do with now, the 2017 version? This is a literary element known as foreshadowing. Take notes, kids, because we're establishing a theme. The 2017 version of Dark and Light is a game that, like its predecessor, has a grand vision. Instead of assigning players classes or races, you can build your character from the ground up. The game's creation suite is surprisingly in-depth. There are plenty of options for making your character look exactly how you want them to. The number of hairstyles available was a bit disappointing, but the rest of the suite around it was fantastic. This is where the game hits its first stumbling block, though. This is because you may never actually get to the character creation screen. When I first attempted to play the game, it crashed 3 separate times immediately after selecting a server. One of these crashes took my whole machine down with it. After nearly an hour of troubleshooting, I got the game to boot and connect to a server. The first thing you'll see once you've picked your server is this loading screen. Learn to enjoy it because you'll be staring at it for a long time. The game took 27 minutes to load from this loading screen, and then launched the character creator. This is not an exaggeration. I have nearly a half hour of footage on my computer that's nothing but this loading screen on loop. Once you've made your character, you'll have to wait for another shorter loading screen. When you finally load it in, you can begin your adventure. Visually, Dark and Light impresses most of the time. The models are decent, and the lighting effects look great. This is especially true for fire and spell particle effects. The textures on trees, rocks, and the ground, though, look horrible even on the epic graphics preset. The animations for monsters and player characters are also awful and disjointed. As a word of caution, you'll suddenly become immobilized by rocks or other shrubs in the terrain without explanation. Characters also experience ridiculous ragdoll effects upon death, clipping through the ground and into the mouth of hell itself. The game doesn't look terrible, but it feels unfinished. It lacks any kind of polish. Despite this, I found myself wanting to explore the world. I wanted to see as much of it as I possibly could take in, and I was anxious to find any secrets or new things waiting just beyond the next hill. Even with its graphical flaws, the game's world still manages to establish a strong sense of atmosphere. Dark and Light ruins this atmosphere almost immediately with its horrible optimization, though. The game's frame rate constantly drops, dips, and fluctuates. For reference, my machine is running a 6th generation i7 processor, a GTX 970 graphics card, and 16 gigs of RAM. If you've got anything less than that, I wouldn't try to run the game on anything beyond low or medium settings. The core gameplay in Dark and Light centers around survival and experience. Everything you do in the game nets your character experience and rank points in a certain skill set. These sets make up 3 different trees: adventuring, magic, and architecture. Adventuring allows you to craft armor, weapons, and essential survival items like campfires. Magic is self-explanatory. Leveling up different schools of magic allows you to learn the spells of that school. architecture is also straightforward. You build stuff so you don't freeze to death. Gathering resources, monitoring your hunger, thirst, and stamina levels, and learning to craft new things all feels very rewarding. The game encourages you to play the way you want to play and to continually grow in power. This is without question Dark and Light's strongest selling point. The core mechanics are fun. Dark and Light teaches you how the game works through a series of introductory quests that guide you through the basics. These quests work well and don't hold your hand too much. Once you're through the intro quests, you'll receive a series of other missions that teach you more about the game's world and other advanced functions. Unfortunately, trying to complete these quests on a multiplayer server proved to be very challenging. Across 3 different servers, I found the community to be incredibly aggressive and toxic. I understand wanting to kill other players and take any valuable resources they may have. In a survival game, that's par for the course. What I don't understand is how a series of players, all at least 33 levels higher than me, followed me for 25 minutes until they had me cornered. They harassed me via in-game voice chat constantly and repeatedly threatened to kill me. Once they had me cornered, they interrogated me about some faction or guild that I had never even heard of and then killed me. It's worth noting that when you die in the game, you don't lose experience or anything, but you do drop everything you have on you at the time. I want to go on record as saying that I get that this type of situation is what survival games are about. The only part about this that really bothered me was the constant slurs and vulgarities being screamed at me via voice chat. I should add here that there's no way to turn in-game voice chat off that I've found yet. Another point where I drew the line is that these massively high-level players were camping out the starter city and killing everyone that logged into that server, especially unarmed level 1 players. This is a look at the trail of bodies one player left behind him before targeting me. On one hand, it's awe-inspiring. It feels like something right out of Game of Thrones. On the other hand, it does ruin the experience for new players by not ever giving them a chance to start. If you're like me and don't enjoy games with ultra-toxic communities, you may want to skip Dark and Light. As for monetization, Dark and Light is a buy-to-play game. Once you own it, you can play it as much as you like without additional fees. As such, there's no in-game cash shop. At least we can safely say it isn't pay to win. Overall, Dark and Light is a game that directly follows in the footsteps of its predecessor. It has a grand vision and a fantastic foundation. The world is atmospheric and feels massive. The survival and character progression mechanics are fun and rewarding. Unfortunately, the rest of the game around this foundation feels unfinished at best and poorly made at worst. Combine this with an extremely toxic community and terrible optimization, and you have a game that could have been great, but ultimately isn't worth the time it would take to install, or load for that matter. Well, that's all for today. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe and keep it locked on MMOHuts.com for all the latest gaming news and reviews.